Rumpole and the Judge's Elbow, read by the fellow himself. Up to now, in these accounts of my most famous or infamous cases, I have acted as a faithful historian, doing my best to tell the truth, the whole truth, about the events that occurred, and not glossing over the defeats and humiliations which are part of the daily life of an Old Bailey hack, nor being ridiculously modest about my undoubted triumphs. When it comes to the matter of the Judge's Elbow, however, different considerations arise. Many of the vital incidents in the history of the tennis injury to Mr. Justice Featherstone, its strange consequences and near destruction of his peace of mind, necessarily happened when I was absent from the scene. Nor did the judge ever take me into his confidence over the matter. Indeed, as most of his almost frenetic efforts during the trial of Dr. Morris Horridge were devoted to concealing the truth from the world in general, and old Horace Rumpole in particular, it is a truth which may never be fully known. I have been, however, able to piece together from the scraps of information at my disposal, a word or two from a retired usher, some conversations Marigold Featherstone had, which you must be obeyed, a pretty clear picture of what went on in the private and indeed sheltered life of one of the judges of the Queen's Bench. I feel that I now know what led to Guthrie Featherstone's curious behaviour during the Horridge trial, but in reconstructing some of the scenes that led up to this, I have had, as I say for the first time in these accounts, to use the art of the fiction writer, and imagine to a large extent what Sir Guthrie or Lady Marigold Featherstone or the other characters involved may have said at the time. Such scenes are based, however, on a long experience of how Guthrie Featherstone was accustomed to behave in the face of life's little difficulties, that is to say, with anxiety bordering on panic. I think it's also important that this story should be told to warn others of the dangers involved in sitting in judgment on the rest of erring humanity. However, to save embarrassment to anyone concerned, I have left strict instructions that this account should not be published until after the death of the main parties, unless Mr. Truscott of the Caring Bank should become particularly insistent over the question of my overdraft. Guthrie Featherstone, then plain Mr. Guthrie Featherstone, Q.C. M.P., became the head of our chambers in Equity Court on the retirement of Hilda's daddy, old C.H. Whiston, a man who could never bring himself to a proper study of bloodstains. I had expected, as the senior member in practice, to take over chambers from daddy, but Guthrie Featherstone, a new arrival, popped in betwixt the election and my hopes. I've forgotten precisely what brand of MP old Guthrie was. He was either right-wing Labour or left-wing Conservative, until in the end he gave up politics and joined the SDP. He was dedicated to the middle of the road, and very keen on our chamber's image, which on one occasion he thought was being let down badly by the condition of my favourite old hat. Finally, the Lord Chancellor, who was probably thinking of something else at the time, made Guthrie a scarlet judge, and the old darling went into a dreadful state of panic, fearing that there had been a premature announcement of this great event in the history of our times. From that time Sir Guthrie Featherstone was entitled to scarlet and ermine, and other variously coloured dressing gowns, to be worn at different seasons of the year, and sat regularly in the seat of judgment, dividing the sheep from the goats with a good deal of indecision and anxiety. When his day's work was done, he returned to the block of flats in Kensington, where he lived with his wife Marigold. The flats came equipped with a tennis court, and there the judge and his good lady were accustomed to playing mixed doubles with their neighbours, the Addisons, during the long summer evenings. Mr. Addison, I imagine, was excessively respectful of the sporting Guthrie, and frequently called out, "Oh, nice one, Judge," or, "I say, Judge, what frightfully bad luck," during the progress of the game. What I see, doing my best to reconstruct the occasion which gave rise to the following chapter of accidents, is Guthrie and Marigold diving for the same ball with cries of, "Oh, leave it, Marigold," and "Mine, Guthrie." Well, these two rapidly moving bodies were set on a collision course, and when it happened, the judge fell heavily to the asphalt. His wife stood over his recumbent figure, and the anxious Addisons came round the net with cries of, "Oh, nothing broken, I hope and trust." And from then on, perhaps, it went something like this. "Nothing broken, is there, Guthrie?" from Marigold. "My elbow." The judge sat up, nursing the afflicted part. "Oh, such terrible luck, when it was going to be such a super shot," said the ever-sycophantic Addison. "Twiddle your fingers, Guthrie. Let's see if anything is broken." When the judge obeyed, Marigold was able to tell him, "There you are, you see, nothing broken at all." This extraordinary shooting pain. Ow!" Guthrie was clearly suffering. "Oh, you poor man! You are in the wars, aren't you?" Mr. Addison was sympathetic. "Oh, it'll wear off, Guthrie." Lady Featherstone was not. "It shows absolutely no sign of wearing off." "Oh, well, rub it then, Guthrie. For heaven's sake, don't be such a baby." The next day I was at my business at the Old Bailey, making my usual final appeal on the subject of the burden of proof, that great presumption of innocence which has been rightly called the golden thread which runs through British justice, when Mr. Justice Featherstone, presiding over the trial, interrupted my flow to say, "Just a minute, Mr. Rumpole. I'm in considerable pain." He was, in fact, still rubbing his elbow. "I have suffered a serious accident." "Did your lordship say pain?" I couldn't for the moment see how his lordship's accident was relevant to the question of the burden of proof. "It's not something one likes to comment about," the judge commented nobly. "In the general course of events, I have, of course, had some experience of pain, even at a comparatively young age." Did you say comparatively young, my lord?" I thought it was knocking on a bit for a youngster. "And if I was the only person concerned, I should naturally soldier on regardless." "Oh, terribly brave, my lord." And leaving him to soldier on, I turned back to the jury. "Members of the jury, the question you must ask about each one of these charges is, are you certain sure?" "But I mustn't only think of myself," the judge interrupted me again. "The point is, am I in too much pain to give your speech the attention it deserves, Mr. Rumpole?" "Well, I don't know, are you?" That was all the help I could give him. "Exercising the best judgment I have come to the conclusion that I am not. I will adjourn now." "At 3:00? I must confess I was surprised. "Pain," his lordship told me solemnly, "is no respecter of time. Till tomorrow morning, members of the jury." "Would your lordship wish us to send for matron?" I was solicitous. "No, I think not, Mr. Rumpole. I'm afraid in this particular instance matters have gone rather beyond matron." Norman, the tall, bald usher, called on us all to be upstanding. Guthrie rose, and, nursing his elbow and faintly murmuring, "Ow!" left us. Norman the usher was well known to me as a man of the world, well used to judicial foibles, and surprisingly accurate in forecasting the results of cases. He was a man who took pleasure in supplying the needs of others, often coming up to me during lulls in cases to say he knew where to lay his hands on some rubber-backed carpeting or a load of bathroom tiles. Although I felt no need of any of Norman's contacts, he was able on this occasion to put Mr. Justice Featherstone in touch with a cure. Long after his retirement, Norman returned to the Bailey to look up a few old friends, and over a couple of pints of Guinness in the pub opposite he eventually told me of his part in the affair of the judge's elbow. "Muscular, is it, your lordship's affliction?" Norman asked when he had led Guthrie out of court into the judge's room, a leather and panelled sanctum furnished with law reports and silver-framed photographs of the children. Muscular, Norman, the judge admitted. One does not complain. Only one thing for muscular pain, my lord. Aspirins? The judge winced as he started to unbutton his court coat. Now, throw away the aspirins. It's a deep massage. That's what your lordship needs. Here, let me slip that off for you. He removed Guthrie's coat delicately. Of course, your lordship needs a masseuse with strong fingers, one who can manipulate the fibres in depth. At which point the usher grasped the judge's elbow with strong fingers, causing another stab of pain heroically borne. I can feel the fibres are in need of deep, deep manipulation. If your lordship would allow me, I know just the masseuse as'd get to your fibres and release the tension. You know someone, Norman? The judge sounded hopeful. The wife's sister's daughter, Elsie, thoroughly respectable, and fingers on her like the grab of a crane. Talented girl? Precisely what the doctor ordered. Our Elsie has brought relief to thousands of sufferers. Where does she carry on her practice? The judge started tentative inquiries, rather as some fellow in classical times might have said, who's got the key to Pandora's box? In a very hygienic health centre, my lord. Only a stone's throw down the Tottenham Court Road, your lordship. Tottenham Court Road? Guthrie was at first fearful. Not oriental in any way, this place, is it? Oh, bless you, no, my lord. They're thoroughly reliable girls, mostly drawn from the Croydon area, all medically trained, of course. Norman had hung up the court coat and was restoring the judge to mufti. Medically trained? Oh, that's reassuring. They have made a thorough study, my lord, of the human anatomy, in all its aspects. Seeing as you've got no relief through the usual channels, my doctor's absolutely useless. The Chelsea GP had merely referred the judge to Time, the great healer. Guthrie lifted a brush and comb to his hair, and was again reminded of his plight. Ow! Oh, you're right, Norman. Why not try a little alternative medicine? You wait, my lord, Norman told him. Just let our Elsie get her fingers on you. The address which Norman gave the judge was situated in a small street running eastward from Tottenham Court Road. After a few days' more pain, Guthrie took a taxi there, got out and paid off the driver, wincing as he felt for his money. I had a bit of trouble with my elbow, he said, as though to explain his visit to the Good Life Health Centre, sauna, and massage. At which point the cabby drove away, no doubt thinking it was none of his business, and Guthrie entered the establishment in some trepidation. He was reassured to some extent by the cleanliness of the interior. There was a good deal of light and panelling, photographs of fit-looking young blonde persons of both sexes, and a kindly receptionist behind a desk filing her nails. I rang for an appointment, Guthrie told her. The name's Featherstone. Elsie, the receptionist called out. Your gentleman's here. You can go right in, dear. She nodded towards a bead curtain. And take off your things. Later, after a brief spell in an airless and apparently red-hot wooden cupboard, the judge was stretched out on a table, clad in nothing but a towel, whilst Elsie, a muscular but personable young lady who might have captained a hockey team, manipulated his elbow, and asked him if he was going anywhere nice for his holiday. Hope so. I'm tired out with sitting, Guthrie told her. Are you really? Elsie no doubt had heard all sorts of complaints in her time. In fact, I've been sitting almost continuously this year. Oh, fancy. It gets tiring. Oh, yes, sure it does. Not how I did my elbow in, though. Tennis. When I'm not sitting, my wife and I play a bit of tennis. Ah, well, it makes a change, dear, doesn't it? When Elsie had finished her manipulations, Guthrie got dressed and came back into the reception area. Being a little short of cash, and seeing the American Express sign on the counter, he decided to pay with his credit card. "It feels better already," he told her as he signed without an ouch. The receptionist banged the paperwork into her machine. "There we are, then." She tore off his part of the slip and handed it and the credit card back to Guthrie, who thanked her again and put the card and the slip carefully into his wallet. After he had left, Elsie came out from behind the curtain. "Oh, he says he's tired out, done a lot of sitting," she told the receptionist, who smiled and said, "Poor bloke." I was not, of course, among those present when Mr. Justice Featherstone had his treatment, and I have had to invent or attempt to reconstruct the above dialogue. I may have got it wrong, but of one thing I am certain. The judge's massage was given in strict accordance with the Queensberry rules, and there was nothing below the belt. Whilst Guthrie had undergone this satisfactory cure and almost forgotten his old tennis injury, much had changed in our old chambers at 3 Equity Court. I had been away for a week or two doing a long firm fraud in Cardiff, a case which had absolutely no bloodstains and a great deal of adding up. I returned from exile to find our tattered old clerk's room, with its dusty files, abandoned briefs, out-of-date textbooks, and faded photographs of C.H. Whiston over the fireplace, had been greatly smartened up. Someone had had it painted white, giving Henry a new desk and Diane a new typewriter, hung the sort of coloured prints on the walls which they buy by the yard for modernized hotels, and introduced a large number of potted plants, at which Diane was, even as I arrived one morning in my old hat and mac, squirting with a green plastic spray. "Oh, through the jungle very softly flits a shadow and a sigh." The shadow was Diane, and the sigh came from Henry when I asked if this was indeed our old clerk's room, or the tropical house at Kew. It's Mr. Arthstoke." Henry pronounced the name as though it were some recently discovered malignant disease. "Oh, some old gardener?" I asked, clutching 3 weeks' accumulation of bills. "The new young gentleman in chambers. He reckons an office space needs a more contemporary look." "And I've been kicked off for putting." Uncle Tom was in the corner as usual, trickling a golf ball across the carpet. "Uncle Tom has been ticked off." Diane confirmed the seriousness of the situation. "I've been asked to do it upstairs, but it isn't the same." Uncle Tom sounded reasonable. "Down here you can see the world passing by." "Carry on putting, Uncle Tom," I told him. "Imagine you're on the 4th green at Kuala Lumpur." I forced my way through the undergrowth and went into the passage. There I found that our clerk had followed me, and was whispering urgently. Could I have a word in confidence?" "Oh, in the passage?" "It's not only my clerk's room Mr. Arthstoke reckons should have a more contemporary look." Henry started to outline his grievances. "He says we could do with a smarter typist. Well, as you know, Mr. Rumpole, Diane has always been extremely popular with the legal executives." "Oh, a fine-looking girl, Diane, a fine, sturdy girl," I said. "I always thought so." I had the feeling that Henry felt a certain tendresse for our tireless typist, although I didn't think it right to inquire into such matters too deeply. "Worse than that, Mr. Rumpole. He wants to privatize the clerking." "To what?" "Mr. Arthstoke's not over-enamoured, sir, with my 10%. For the benefit of those who have never shared in the splendours and miseries of life at the bar, I should explain that the senior clerk in a set of chambers is usually paid 10% of the earnings of his stable of legal hacks. This system is frequently criticised by those who wish to modernize our profession, but I do not share their views." "Good God," I said. "If barristers' clerks didn't get their 10%, we'd have no one left to envy." "And he's got his criticism of you too, Mr. Rumpole. That's why I thought, sir, we might be in the same boat on this one, even if we have had our differences in the past. "Of me?" I was surprised and a little pained to hear it. "What has this Johnny-come-lately got to criticise about me?" "Well, he's not enamoured of your old Burberry." Unreasonable, I thought. My Mac may not have been hand-tailored in Savile Row, but it has kept out the rain on journeys to some pretty unsympathetic courts over the years. And then I looked at our clerk and saw a man apparently in the terminal stage of melancholia. "Henry," I asked him, "why this hang-dog look? What on earth's the need for this stricken whisper? If whatever his name is has only been here a few weeks, voted in when you were in Cardiff, Mr. Rumpole, well, why does our learned head of chambers take a blind bit of notice?" "Well, quite frankly, it seems to Diane and me, Mr. Ballard thinks with great respect that the sun shines out of Mr. Hearthstoke's—" Yes, well, perhaps it was just as well he was prevented from finishing this sentence by our learned head of chambers, Soapy Sam Ballard, who popped out of his door and instructed Henry to rally the chaps for a chambers meeting. He didn't seem exactly overjoyed to see me back. Charles Hearthstoke turned out to be a young man in his early 30s, dark, slender, and surprisingly good-looking. He reminded me at once of Steerforth in the illustrations to David Copperfield. Despite his appearance of a romantic hero, he was one of those persons who took the view, once fashionable with our masters in government, that we were all set in this world to make money. He might have made an excellent accountant or merchant banker. He wasn't, in my view, cut out for work at the criminal bar. He had been at some chambers where he hadn't hit it off with the clerk, a fact which didn't surprise me in the least, and now he sat at the right hand of Ballard and was clearly the apple of the eye of our pure-minded head of chambers. "I've asked Hearthstoke to carry out an efficiency study into the workings of No. 3 Equity Court, and I must say he's done a superb job." My heart sank as Ballard told us this. "Quite superb. Charles, would you speak to this paper?" "He may speak to it," I grumbled, "but would it answer back?" "What's that, Rumpole?" "Oh, nothing, Ballard, nothing at all." But Uncle Tom insisted on telling them. "That was rather a good one. Do you hear what Rumpole said, Hoskins? Would it answer back?" "Oh, leave it, Uncle Tom." I restrained him. Hearthstoke was now holding up some sort of document. "In the first section of the report, I deal with obvious reforms to the system. It's quite clear that our fees need to be computerized, and I've made inquiries about the necessary software." "Oh, I'm all in favour of that." "Yes, Rumpole?" Ballard allowed my interruption with a sigh. "Well, software. Far too many stiff collars in the legal profession. Makes your neck feel it's undergoing a blunt execution." "Has Rumpole done another joke?" Uncle Tom didn't seem to be sure about it. "Oh, do please carry on, Charles." Ballard apologized to Hearthstoke for the crasser element in chambers. "I'm also doing a feasibility study and putting our clerking out to private tender," Hearthstoke told the meeting. "I'm sure we can find a young, up-thrusting group of chartered accountants who'd take on the job at considerably less than Henry's 10%. "Oh, brilliant," I told him. "Oh, so glad you agree, Rumpole." "Oh, a wonderful thing, privatization. Why not privatize the judges while you're about it? I mean, they're grossly inefficient. Only give out about 100 years' imprisonment a month on the average. Why not sell 'em off to the Americans and step up production?" That, if I may say so," Hearthstoke gave a small wintry smile, "is the dying voice of what may well become a dying profession." "We've got to move with the times, Rumpole, as Charles has pointed out." Ballard was clearly exercising a great self-control in dealing with the critics. "As a matter of fact, I'm entirely in favour of the privatization of Henry." This was the colourless barrister Hoskins. "Speaking as a chap with daughters, I can ill afford 10%. Those of us who have a bit of practice at the bar, those of us who can't spend all our days doing feasibility studies on the price of paper clips, know how important it is to keep our clerk's room happy. That, at any rate, was my considered opinion. Besides, I don't want to go in there in the morning and find the place full of up-thrusting young chartered accountants. It'd put me off my breakfast.
Is that all you have to say on the subject?
Ballard looked as though he couldn't take much more. Absolutely. I'm going to work. Come along, Miss Probert. I rose to my feet. I believe you've got a noting brief. There's a dingy-looking character in a dirty mac hanging around the waiting-room for you, Rumpole, Erskine Brown was at pains to tell me. And talking of dirty macs, Hearthstoke looked at me in a meaningful fashion. There is one other point I have to raise, he said, but I left him to raise it on his own. I was busy. The client who was waiting for me was separated from his Mac. All the same, he cut a somewhat depressing figure. He wore thick pebbled glasses, a drooping bow tie, and a cardigan which had claimed its fair share of soup. A baggy grey suit completed the get-up of a man who seemed to have benefited not at all from the programme of physical fitness which he sold to the public. Nor did he seem to enjoy the prosperity which the prosecution had suggested. He had a curiously high voice and the pained expression of a man who at least pretended not to understand why he was due to be tried at the Old Bailey. Dr. Maurice Horridge. Where does the doctor come from, by the way? I asked him. New Bognor, a small seat of learning, Mr. Rumpole, in the shadow of the Canadian Rockies. You know Canada well. I was never out of England, Mr. Rumpole, alas. So this degree of yours, you wrote up for it, then? I obtained my diploma by correspondence, he corrected me. None the less valuable for that. And it is a doctorate in theology, Mr. Rumpole. I trust you find that helpful? I got up and stood at the window looking out at some nice clean rain. Oh, very helpful, I'm sure, if you want to be well up in the book of Job, or if you want to carry on an intelligent chat on the subject of Ezekiel. I just don't see how it helps with the massage business. The line of the body, Mr. Rumpole, is the line of God. My client spoke reverently. We are all of us created in his image. Yes, I've often thought he must be quite a strange-looking chap. Pardon me, Mr. Rumpole? Dr. Horridge looked pained. Oh, forget I spoke, but massage. Spiritual, Mr. Rumpole, entirely spiritual. I could stretch you flat on the floor with your head supported by a telephone directory and lay your limbs out spiritually. All your aches and pains would be relieved at once. I don't know if you'd care to stretch out. The girls in these massage parlours you run. I got to the nub of the case. Trained, Mr. Rumpole, all fully trained. Medically. In my principles, of course, the principles of the spiritual alignment of the bones. What's alleged is that they so far forgot their spiritual mission as to indulge in a little hanky-panky with the customers. I explained the nature of the charges to the good doctor. Roughly, it was alleged that he was living on immoral earnings and keeping a large number of disorderly houses. I cannot believe it, Mr. Rumpole. I simply cannot believe it of my girls. He spoke like a priest who has heard of group sex among the Vestal virgins. So that your defence, I asked him as patiently as possible, is that entirely without your knowledge your girls turned from sacred to profane massage. Dr. Horridge nodded his head energetically. He seemed to think that I had put his case extremely well. Now, I must try to tell you how the troubles of Dr. Maurice Horridge became connected with the painful matter of the judge's elbow. Meeting his wife at the tennis court one night, he had so far improved in his health, thanks to Elsie, that he felt fit enough to resume mixed doubles with the Addisons. Guthrie found Marigold reading the Standard. Massage parlours. She almost spat out the words with disgust. Well, yes. In fact, Guthrie hadn't yet confided the full facts of his visit to the Good Life Health Centre to his wife, who read aloud to him from the paper. A doctor of theology charged with running massage parlours as disorderly houses. How revolting. What was it you wanted to tell me, Guthrie? Well, nothing really. Just that my elbow seems much better. I can really swing a racket now. Well, just don't dislocate anything else. She gave him more of the news. 35 massage parlours alleged to offer immoral services in the Greater London area. Pathetic. Grown men having to go to places like that. I'm quite sure some of them just needed a massage, Guthrie tried to persuade her. If you believe that, Guthrie, you'd believe anything. She read on regardless. Arab oil millionaires, merchant bankers, and well-known names from television are said to be among those who used the cheap sex provided at Dr. Horridge's establishments and paid by credit card. Guthrie stifled an agonized exclamation of terror. What on earth's the matter, Guthrie? That elbow playing you up again? The next thing Guthrie did was to visit the tennis club gents and flush away the American Express slip which he had retained for the monthly check-up. He didn't want Marigold searching for a bit of cash to find the dreaded words massage and sauna stamped on a bit of blue paper. The next day, in the privacy of the judge's room, he made a telephone call which I can imagine went something like this. American Express, the name is Featherstone, Mr. Justice Featherstone. No, not Justice Featherstone with a hyphen. My name is Featherstone, and I'm a justice. I'm a judge, that is. Yes. Well, actually, I got into a bit of a muddle and paid someone with a credit card when I should have paid cash, and if I could go and pay them now, could I get my credit card slip back, and you wouldn't need to have any record of it at all if it's a purely private matter, just a question of my own personal accounting? Do I make myself clear? What's that? I don't, It's never easy to recall the past and rectify our mistakes. In this case, Guthrie was to find it impossible. Norman, the usher who started all the trouble, had retired suddenly and gone to live in the north of England, and when Guthrie revisited the address near Tottenham Court Road in the hope that his credit card transaction could be expunged from the records, he found that the health centre had sold up and the premises taken over by Luxy Fruits Limited. He was offered some nice juicy satsumas by the greengrocer now in charge, but all traces of Elsie and the receptionist had vanished away. Guthrie's cup of anxiety ran over when he bumped into Claude Erskine-Brown walking up from the Temple Tube Station. Always good to see some of the chaps in my old chambers, the judge said, graciously enough to observe after Claude had removed his hat and then restored it to its position. See, your wife was in the Court of Appeal again the other day. And Rumpole, what's Horace doing? Oh, something sordid, as usual, Claude told him. Distasteful. Oh, downright disgusting. Rumpole's cases do tend to lower the tone of the equity court. This time it's massage parlours. Rumpole's acting for the king of the massage parlours. Of course he thinks it's a huge joke. But it's not, Erskine-Brown, is it? The judge was serious. In fact, it's not a joke at all. Well, I can't pretend my marriage is all champagne and opera. We've had our difficulties, Philly and I, from time to time, as I'll be the first to admit, but thank heavens I've never had to resort to massage parlours. I simply can't understand it. No, it's a mystery to me, of course. Anyway, that sort of thing simply lets down the tone of Chambers. Yes, of course, Claude, of course it does. The honour of equity court is still extremely important to me, as you well know. Perhaps I should invite Horace Rumpole to lunch at the Sheridan and have a word with him on the subject. What subject? Claude was apparently a little mystified. Massage? No. The judge corrected himself. I mean chambers, of course. Oysters, Mr. Rumpole, and I'll take soup of the day, and Mr. Rumpole will be having the grouse, and I'll settle for the Sheridan Club hamburger. I thought a Chablis Premier Cru to start with, and then, would the Chateau Talbot 77 appeal to you at all, Horace? The autumn sunlight filtered through the tall windows that badly needed cleaning, and glimmered on the silver and portraits of old judges. Around us, actors hobnobbed with politicians and publishers. I sat in the Sheridan Club, amazed at the judge's hospitality. As the waitress left us with my substantial order, I asked him if he'd won the pools. No, it's just that one gets so few opportunities to entertain the chaps from one's old chambers. Now Claude Erskine-Brown tells me you're doing this case about, what was it, beauty parlours? Massage parlours, or as I prefer to call them, health centres. Oh, yes, of course. Massage parlours. The judge seemed to choke on the words and then recovered. Well, I suppose some of these places are quite respectable and above board, aren't they? I mean, people might just drop in because they got a touch of housemaid's knee. I was incredulous. Well, that sort of thing, yes. Well, someone who was as innocent and unsuspecting as that, they shouldn't be let off the lead. Why do you say that? The waitress came with the white wine. Guthrie tasted it, and she then poured. I tasted a cold and stony Chablis, no doubt at a price that seldom passes my lips. Well, to your average British jury, the word massage parlours means only one thing, I told Guthrie, without cheering him up. What? Hanky-panky. Oh, you think that, do you? Oh, everyone does. Hanky-panky. The word stuck in the judge's throat. Oh, in practically every case. Rumpole. Horace. Oh, no, look, do let me top you up. He poured more Chablis. You're defending in this case, I take it? Well, what else should I be doing? And as such, as defending counsel, I mean, you'll get to see the prosecution evidence? Oh, I've seen most of that already, I assured him cheerfully. Have you? He looked as though I'd already passed sentence on him. Extraordinarily interesting. Yes, it's funny, really. Funny? Yes, extremely funny. You know, all sorts of very important people visited my client's establishments. Nobs. Bigwigs. Big wigs, Horace? Guthrie seemed to take the expression personally. Oh, most respectable citizens. And you know what? They actually paid with their credit cards. Can you imagine anything so totally dotty? Dotty. No, nothing. The judge laughed mirthlessly. So their names are all, in the evidence, plain for all the world to see, He broke off as the soup and the oysters were brought by the waitress, and then said thoughtfully, I don't suppose that all the evidence will necessarily be put before the jury. Oh, no, only a few little nuggets, the cream of the collection. It should provide an afternoon of harmless fun. Not fun for the big wigs involved. He looked appalled. Well, if they were so idiotic as to use their credit cards... There was a long pause, during which my host seemed sunk in the deepest gloom. He then rallied a little, smiled in a somewhat ghastly manner, and addressed me with all his judicial charm and deep concern. Horace, he said, don't you find this criminal work rather exhausting? Oh, it's a killer, I admitted. Only sometimes a bit of evidence turns up and makes it all worthwhile. Have you ever considered relaxing a little? He ignored any further reference to bigwigs in massage parlours. "Perhaps on a circuit bench." "You're joking." He had amazed me. "Anyway, I'm far too old." "I don't know. I could have a word with the powers that be. They might ask you to sit as a deputy, Rumpole, on a more or less permanent basis. 150 quid a day and absolutely no worries." Deputy circus judge? I was still in a state of shock. Why should they offer me that? As a little tribute, perhaps, to the tactful way you've always conducted your defences. Tactful? No one's ever called me that before. I squeezed lemon on an oyster and sent it sliding down. "I've always found you extremely tactful in court, Horace, and discreet. Oysters all right, are they?" "Oh, yes, Judge." I looked at him with some suspicion. "Absolutely nothing wrong with the oysters." Walking back from the Sheridan Club to Chambers, I thought about Guthrie's strange suggestion and felt even more surprised. Deputy Circuit Judge? Why on earth should I want that? These thoughts flitted through my head. Judging people is not my trade. I defend them. All the same, 150 smackers a day. The old darling did say 150. And you didn't even have to stand up for it. It could all be earned sitting down, with hacks constantly flattering you and saying, "If your honour pleases, if your honour would be so kind as to look at the fingerprint evidence." No one's ever spoken to me like that. But what was the judge up to exactly? Offering me grouse and oysters and deputy circus judge? What precisely was Guthrie's game? I could find no answer to these questions as I walked along the Strand. And then a voice hailed me, and I turned to see a tall, bald man, familiar to me from the Bailey. It was Norman, the ex-usher, who had apparently called down to the old shop to collect his cards. He asked if Mr. Justice Featherston's elbow had improved. "Oh, it seems to be remarkably recovered," I told him. "In terrible pain, he was," Norman clucked sympathetically. "Don't you remember? I was able to put him onto a place where they could give him a bit of relief. Get down to the deep fibres, you know. Have the judge's bones stretched out properly." "You recommended a place?" I was suddenly interested. The wife's niece worked there. Nice type of establishment it was, really. Very hygienically run." He looked down the road. "Oh, here comes my number 11 bus. I'll be seeing you, Mr. Rumpole." What place? What place did you recommend exactly?" I tried to ask him, but he skipped lightly onto his number 11 and left me. The prosecutor in Regina versus Dr. Morris Horridge was a perfectly decent fellow called Brinsley Lampitt. I called on him at his chambers, and he let me have a large cardboard box of documents, bank statements, accounts, and credit card slips, all connected with the questioned massage parlours. My meetings with Guthrie Featherston and Norman the usher had given me the idea of a defence which seemed so improbable that at least it had to be tried. I carried the box of exhibits back to Chambers and set Miss Liz Probert to sift through them with particular reference to the credit card transactions. Then I went down to see Henry. I found Charles Hearthstoke in the clerk's room asking for PAYE forms and petty cash vouchers for coffee consumed over the last 2 years. Henry was looking furious and Diane somewhat flustered. I discovered much later that they had been surprised in a flagrant kiss behind a potted plant when Hearthstoke entered. On my arrival he turned his unwelcome attentions to me. "Sorry you had to slip away from the Chambers meeting, Rumpole." "Oh, what did I miss, Hearthrug?" I asked him. "Have you replaced me with a reliable computer?" "Not yet, but we did pass a resolution on the general standards of appearance in Chambers. Old Macs are not acceptable now, over a black jacket and striped trousers." The pill then left us, and I looked after him with some irritation and contempt. "I quite agree with you, Mr. Rumpole," Henry said, and I told him we stood together on the matter. "Together," I told him, "we shall contrive to scupper Hearthrug." "It'll need a bit of working out," Henry said, "Mr. Ballard being so pro. Bollard, you leave Bollard to me. Oh, providing, Henry, I can leave something to you." "I'll do my best, sir. What exactly?" "Miss Osgood, the lady who arranges the lists down the Bailey. You know, your co-star from the Bromley Amateur Dramatics. We're playing opposite each other, Mr. Rumpole, in brief encounter. Encounter her, Henry. Drop a word in her shell-like ear about the massage parlour case. What we need, above all things, is a sympathetic judge. There is a tide in the affairs of barristers, Henry, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full tide were we now afloat, and I took charge of the helm and suggested the name of the judge whom I thought Miss Osgood would do well to assign to Regina versus Horridge. So it came about that when Guthrie Featherstone arrived for his next stint of work down the Bailey, and Harold, the new usher, brought him coffee in his room, he found the judge staring, transfixed with horror, at the papers in the case he was about to try, and muttering the words, "Massage parlours," in a voice of deep distress. Not even the offer of a few nice biscuits would cheer him up. And when he entered the court and saw Dr. Horridge in the dock, Rumpole smiling up at him benignly, and the table of proposed exhibits loaded with credit card slips, the judge looked like a man being led to the place of execution. "Mr. Lampitt, Mr. Rumpole," his lordship addressed us both in deeply serious tones before the jury was summoned into court. "I feel I have a duty to raise a matter of personal nature." I said I hoped he wasn't in pain. "No, not that, Mr. Rumpole, no, not that. The fact is, Mr. Lampitt, Mr. Rumpole, gentlemen, I feel very strongly that I should not try this case. I should retire and leave the matter to some other judge." "Oh, of course we should be most reluctant to lose your lordship," I flattered Guthrie, and Brinsley Lampitt chimed in with, "Most reluctant." "Well, there it is. I'll rise now, and—" Guthrie started to make his escape. "May we ask why?" I stopped him. "May I ask what?" "Why, my lord? I mean, it's nothing about my client, I hope." "Oh, no, Mr. Rumpole, nothing at all to do with him." The judge was back despondently in his seat. "Well, I can't imagine that your lordship knows my client." "Know him? Oh, certainly not." Judge was positive. "Not that I'm suggesting I'd have anything against knowing your client. I mean, if I did, which I most certainly don't." "Then, with the greatest respect, my lord, where's the difficulty?" "Where's the what, Mr. Rumpole?" The judge was clearly in some agony of mind. "The difficulty, my lord." "You wish to know where the difficulty is?" "Well, if your lordship pleases." And you, Mr. Lampitt, you wish to know where the difficulty is?" "If your lordship pleases," said the old darling for the crown. "It's a private matter, as you know, Mr. Rumpole," was the best the judge could manage after a long pause. "As I know, my lord? Oh, then it can't be exactly private. Perhaps I should make this clear in open court. I happened to have lunch at my club with counsel for the defence." "Oh, the oysters were excellent. I'm grateful to your lordship." There was a flutter of laughter, and Harold called for silence as the judge went on. "And I happened to discuss this case in purely general terms with counsel for the defence." In the ensuing silence, Lampitt was whispering to the police. I asked, "Is that all, my lord?" "Yes. Isn't it enough?" The judge sounded deeply depressed. Lambert didn't cheer him up by telling him that he'd spoken to the officer in charge of the case, who had no objection whatever to the judge trying Dr. Horridge. He was sure that no lunchtime conversation with Mr. Rumpole could possibly prejudice his lordship in any way. In fact, Brinsley Lambert ended, to the despair of the judge, the prosecution wish your lordship to retain this case. And so do the defence. I drove in another nail. In fact, I urge your lordship to do so, Lambert urged. So do I, my lord, from Rumpole. It would be a great waste of public money if we had to fix a new date before a different judge. And in view of the Lord Chancellor's recent warnings about the high cost of legal aid cases, the judge clearly felt caught then. He looked with horror at the exhibits and thought with terror of the Lord Chancellor. Mr. Lambert, Mr. Rumpole, he asked us without any real hope, are you insisting I try this case? With great respect, yes, from Lambert. That's what it comes to, my lord, from me. So the 12 honest citizens were summoned in, and one of the strangest trials I have ever known began, because I could not tell who was more fearful of the outcome, the prisoner at the bar or the learned judge. Picture Guthrie, after the first day in court, returning to play a little autumn tennis with his wife. Unfortunately, the game was rained off, and he sat with Marigold in the bar of the tennis club and told her, when she asked if he'd had a good day, that he was sorry to say that he'd not. Then he looked out of the window at the grey sky and asked her if she didn't sometimes long to get away from it all. A fellow I was at school with runs a little bar in Ibiza. Wouldn't you like to run a little bar in Ibiza, Marigold? I think I should hate it. But you don't want to hang around about Kensington in the rain, married to a judge who's away all day sitting. I like you being a judge, Guthrie, Marigold explained patiently. I like you being away all day sitting. And what's wrong with Kensington? It's handy for Harrods. Marigold, he started again after a thoughtful silence. Yes, Guthrie? I was just thinking about that cabinet minister, you know, the chap who had to resign over some scandal. Oh, did he run a little bar in Ibiza? No, but what I remember about him is his wife stood by him through thick and thin. Would you stand by me, Marigold? Through thick and thin. What's the scandal, Guthrie? She was curious to know, but he answered, nothing, no, just a theoretical question. I just wondered if you'd stand by me. That's all. Don't count on it, Guthrie, she told him. Don't ever count on it. Meanwhile, back at 3 Equity Court, Liz Probert was working late, sorting through the prosecution exhibits of which we had not yet made a full list. Hearthstoke saw the light on in my room, and, suspecting me of wasting electricity, called in to inspect. When he saw what she was doing, he apparently offered to help Liz with her task, and, sitting beside her, started to sort out the credit card slips. She remembered asking him why he was helping her, and hoping it had nothing to do with her eyes. She told him that Claude Erskine-Brown had taken her to the opera and complimented her on her eyes, a moment she had found particularly embarrassing. Oh, Erskine-Brown's old-fashioned, like everything else in these chambers, he told her. Just because I'm a woman. I mean, I bet no one mentioned your eyes. And Hoskins told me I could only do petty larceny and divorce. Quite honestly, he thinks that's all women are fit for. Oh, out of the ark, Hoskins. Liz, I know we disagree about a lot of things. Oh, do you? She looked at him. I suppose it was not an entirely hostile gaze. Well, I'm standing as a Conservative for Battersea Council, he told her. And your father's Red Ron of south-east London. But we're both young. We both want things changed. When we finish this, Why don't you buy yourself a Chinese at the Golden Gate in Chancery Lane?" "Oh, why on earth?" "Well, I could buy one too, and we might even eat them at the same table. Oh, and I do promise not to mention your eyes." "Oh, can if you want to." "But mention your eyes." "Oh, no, you fool. Eat your Chinese at my table." She was laughing as I came in after a little refreshment at Pomeroy's wine bar. I took in the scene with some surprise. "Hearthrug! What's this, another deputation about my tailoring?" "I was helping out your pupil, Rumpole." He was staring with some distaste at my old Mac. "Oh, very considerate of you. I can take over now, after a pit stop at Pomeroy's for refuelling. Why don't you two young things go home?" Liz Probert went, after Hearthstoke told her to wait for him downstairs. And then he revealed some of the results of his snooping round our chambers. "I was just going to ask about Henry." "What about Henry?" I lit a small cigar. "I was looking at his PAYE returns. He is married, isn't he? To a lady tax inspector in Bromley, that's my belief. So what exactly is his relationship with Diane, the typist? Oh, friendly, I should imagine." "Just friendly?" "That's a question I've never cared to ask." There are lots of questions like that, aren't there, Rumpole?" And with that the appalling hearthrug left me. I pulled the box of documents toward me and started working on them angrily. In the morning I would have to deal with further snoopers, police officers in plain clothes, or rather in no clothes at all, as they lay on various massage tables and pretended to be in need of affection. "Detective Constable Martin," I asked the solid-looking copper with the moustache, "that is not a note you made at the time?" "No, sir." "Of course not. At the time this incident occurred, you were deprived of your clothing, and no doubt of your notebook also." "I made the note on my return to the station." "After these exciting events had taken place?" "After the incident complained of, yes." "And your recollection was still clear?" "Quite clear, Mr. Rumpole." It started off with the lady therapist." "The masseuse, yes." "Passing an entirely innocent remark." She asked me if I was going anywhere nice on holiday." "She asked you that?" The evidence seemed to have awakened disturbing memories in the judge. "Yes, my lord." "And up to that time it appeared to be a perfectly routine, straightforward massage?" I put it to the officer. "I informed the young lady that I had a certain pain in the knee from playing football." "Was that the truth?" I asked severely. "No, my lord," D.C. Martin told the judge reluctantly. "So," I said, "you were lying, officer." Yes, if you put it that way." "Well, what other way is there of putting it? You are an officer who is prepared to lie?" "In the course of duty, yes." "Oh, and submit to sexual advances in massage parlours in the course of duty?" I was rewarded by a ripple of laughter from the jury and a shocked sign from the judge. "Mr. Rumpole," he said politely, "can I help?" "Oh, of course, my lord." I was suitably grateful. "When the massage started, you told the young lady you had a pain in your knee?" The judge recapped, rubbing in the point. "Yes, my lord." "From playing tennis?" "Football, my lord." "Oh, yes, of course, yes, football. Much obliged." His lordship made a careful note. "So far as the lady masseuse was concerned, that might have been the truth?" "She might have believed it, my lord," the detective constable admitted grudgingly. "And so far as you know, quite a number of perfectly decent, respectable, happily married men may visit these health centres simply because they have received injuries in various sporting activities, football, tennis, and the like." The judge was moved to express his indignation. Some may, I suppose, my lord. D.C. Martin was still grudging. Many may. Yes. Very well. The judge turned from the officer with distaste. Yes, Mr. Rumpole, thank you. Oh, thank you, my lord, if your lordship pleases. I stopped smiling and turned to the witness. So at first sight this appeared to be an entirely genuine health centre. At first sight, yes. An entirely genuine health centre. The judge was actually writing it down, paying a quite unusual compliment to the defence. Those were your words, Mr. Rumpole? My exact words, your lordship. No doubt your lordship is writing them down for the benefit of the jury. I am, Mr. Rumpole, I am indeed. I saw Lampitt looking bewildered. Judges who brief themselves for the accused are somewhat rare birds down the Bailey. And the whole thing was as pure as the driven snow, In fact, it was the normal treatment of a football injury until you made a somewhat distasteful suggestion. Distasteful? D.C. Martin appeared to resent the adjective. Just remind the jury of what you said, officer, as you lay on that massage table clad only in a towel. I said, Well, my dear, the officer read carefully from his notebook, how about a bit of the other? The what, officer? The judge was puzzled. The other, my lord. The other what? Just the other. I must confess I don't understand. His lordship turned to me for assistance. You were using an expression taken from the vernacular, I suggested to the detective constable. Meaning what, Mr. Rumpole? The judge was still confused. Hanky-panky, my lord. I'm much obliged. I hope that's clear to the jury? Guthrie turned to the 12 honest citizens, who nodded wisely. You suggested some form of sexual intimacy might be possible, The judge was now master of the facts. I did, my lord, putting it in terms I felt the young lady would understand. And if you hadn't made this appalling suggestion, the massage might have continued quite inoffensively. It might have done. To the considerable benefit of your knee. There was nothing wrong with my knee, my lord. No, of course not. You were lying about that. And then, high on his success, Guthrie asked the question that would have been better to leave unasked. When you asked the young lady about the other, what did she reply? Her answer was, my lord, that'll be £20. Very well, officer, Guthrie said hastily. No one wants to keep this officer, do they? The witness may be released. And as D.C. Martin left the box, Brinsley Lampitt whispered to me, Have you any idea why the judge is batting so strenuously for the defence? Oh, yes, I whispered back. It must be my irresistible charm. 2 wives, Marigold Featherstone and Hilda, she who must be obeyed Rumpole, bumped into each other in Harrods, had tea together, swapping news of their married lives. Hilda had said that she'd been after a hat to wear when Rumpole was sitting. I thought I might be up beside him on the bench occasionally. Rumpole sitting? For some reason Marigold appeared surprised. Yes, it was your Guthrie that mentioned it to him, actually, when they took a spot of lunch together at the Sheridan Club. Rumpole said that it rather depended on his behaving himself in this case that's going on, but if he's a bit careful, well, a deputy county court judge, for all the world to see. It'll be one in the eye for Claude Erskine-Brown, that's what he's always wanted. Oh, Guthrie seems to want to give up sitting, Marigold told Hilda of their mysterious conversation. He speaks of going to Ibiza. and opening a bar.
Ibiza?
Oh, terrible place, full of package tours and Spaniards.
Oh, dear, I don't think Rumpole and I would like that at all.
Tell me, Mrs. Rumpole, may I call you Helen?
Hilda, Marigold. And you and Guthrie always have.
Guthrie's been most peculiar lately. I wonder if I should take him to the doctor.
Oh, dear, nothing terribly serious, I hope.
He keeps asking me if I'd stand by him through thick and thin. Would you do that for Rumpole?
Oh, well, Rumpole and I have been together nearly 40 years,
she began judicially. Yes?
And I'd stand by him, of course.
Would you?
But thick and thin, no, I'm not sure about that.
No, neither am I, Hilda. I'm not sure at all.
Have another scone, dear.
My wife passed the comforting plate.
And let's hope it never comes to that.
The next morning, Marigold's husband asked Rumpole for the defence and Brinsley Lampitt for the prosecution to see him in his room. I thought I'd just ask you fellows in to find out how much longer this case is going to last. Time's money, you know. I don't think we should delay matters by going into a lot of unnecessary documents. Will you be producing documents, Lampitt?
Just Dr. Horridge's bank accounts, nothing else.
The words clearly brought great comfort to his lordship. I don't think anything else is necessary.
Ah, no, absolutely right. I do so agree. I seem to remember something about customers using credit cards. You won't be putting in any of the credit card slips, nothing of that nature?
No, Judge, I don't think we need bother with that evidence.
No, of course not. They'd just be wasting the jury's time. I'm sure you agree, don't you, Rumpole?
Well, yes, I was more doubtful. That is, not quite.
Not quite?
About the credit card evidence.
Yes?
The judge's spirit seemed to have sunk to a new low. I think I'd like to keep my options open.
Keep them open?
Yes, you see, my argument is that no one who wasn't completely insane would pay by credit card in a disorderly house.
That's your argument.
So the fact that credit cards were used may indicate my client's innocence. It's a matter I'll have to consider, Judge, very carefully.
Yeah, oh, yes, I suppose you will.
His lordship seemed to have resigned himself to certain disaster. Well, was that all you wanted to see us about? I asked cheerfully.
How much longer?
Was all the judge could bring himself to say. Oh, don't worry, Judge, it'll soon be over. After we left, I imagined that Mr. Justice Featherstone got out his Spanish phrase book and practised saying,
Este vaso no está limpio. This glass is not clean.
It must have been after the prosecution case was closed, and immediately before I had put my client in the witness box, that Guthrie Featherstone's view of life underwent a dramatic change. He had brought in the envelope containing his American Express accounts, a document that he had not dared to open. But in the privacy of his room, and after a certain amount of sherry and claret at the judge's luncheon, he steeled himself to open it. Summing up a further reserve of courage, he looked and found the entry, his payment to the Good Life Health Centre.
Good Life?
A wild hope rose in the unhappy judge, and he snatched up the papers in the case he was trying. There was no doubt about it. Maurice Horridge was charged with running a number of disorderly houses known as the Good Line Health Centre. It was clearly a different concern entirely. Guthrie felt like a man given 6 months to live who discovers there's been a bit of a mix-up down the lab and all he's got's a cold in the head. He had never been to one of Dr. Horridge's establishments, and there was no record of any judicial payment among the prosecution exhibits. "I have no doubt," he shouted. "I'm in the clear." And down the Bailey they still speak of the little dance of triumph Guthrie was executing when Harold, the new usher, came to take him into court. Installed, happy now, on his bench, Guthrie was treated to the Rumpole examination-in-chief of my distinctly shifty-looking client. "Dr. Horridge," I was saying, "if any of these young ladies misconducted themselves in your health centres—"
"They wouldn't," the witness protested. "I'm sure they wouldn't. They were spiritually trained, Mr. Rumpole."
"All the same, if by any chance they did, was it with your knowledge and approval?"
"Certainly not, my lord, quite certainly not."
Horridge turned to Guthrie, from whom I expected a look of sympathy. Instead, the judge uttered a sharpish, "Come now, Dr. Horridge."
"Yes, my lord?"
The theological doctor blinked. Come. We have had the evidence from that young officer, Detective Constable Martin, that he suggested to one of your masseurs something of the other."
Something or other, my lord?"
"No, Dr. Horridge." The judge sounded increasingly severe. "Something of the other. I'm sure you know perfectly well what that means." To which the masseurs replied, "That will be £20. A pretty scandalous state of affairs, I'm sure you'll agree."
"Yes, my lord."
What else could the wretched massage peddler say?
"Are you honestly telling this jury that you had no idea whatever that was going on in your so-called health centre?"
"No idea at all, my lord."
"And you didn't make it your business to find out—"
Guthrie was now well and truly briefed for the prosecution.
"Not specifically, my lord."
It wasn't a satisfactory answer. The judge met it with rising outrage.
"Not specifically? Didn't you realize that decent, law-abiding citizens, husbands, and rate-payers might be trapped into the most ghastly trouble just by injuring an a knee?"
"I suppose so, my lord,"
came the abject reply.
"You suppose so? Well, the jury will have heard your answer. What are you doing, Mr. Rumpole?"
His lordship had some reason to look at me. I had wet my forefinger, and now held it up in the air. "Just testing the wind, my lord."
"The wind?"
The judge was puzzled. "Yes, my lord. It seems to completely change direction." When the case was concluded, I returned to chambers, exhausted. Thinking I might try my client's recipe, I lay flat on the floor with my eyes closed. I heard the door open, and the voice of Hearthrug from far away asking, "Rumpole, what's the matter? You dead or something?" "Not dead, just laid out spiritually." I opened my eyes. Losing a case is always a tiring experience. "I'm trying to see Ballard," Hearthstoke alleged. "No, we'll look somewhere else, will you? He always seems to be busy. I want to tell him about Henry." I rose slowly and with some difficulty to a sitting position, and thence to my feet. "What about Henry?"
Kissing Diane in the clerk's room."
The appalling Hearthrug did his best to look suitably censorious.
"It's just not on."
"Oh, I agree." I was upright by now, but panting slightly. "Oh, do you?" He seemed surprised. "I thought you'd say it was all just part of the freedom of the subject, or whatever it is you're so keen on." "Oh, no, good heavens, no, I really think he should stop rehearsing in his place of work."
"Rehearsing?"
He seemed surprised. Yes, didn't you know? Henry's a pillar of the Bromley Amateur Dramatics. He's playing opposite Diane in some light comedy or other. Of course, they both work so hard they hardly get any time to rehearse. I'll speak to them about it. Oh, by the way, how's the housemaid's knee? The what? Clearly my words had no meaning for the man. The dicky ankle, dislocated elbow, bad back, tension in the neck. In a lot of pain, are you? Rumpole, what are you talking about? I'm perfectly fit, thank you. Oh, no aches and pains of any sort? It was my turn to sound surprised. None whatever. How very odd. And you've been having such a lot of massage lately. What on earth do you mean? Hearthrug, I was delighted to see, was starting to bluster. Unfortunate case. The poor old theologian got 2 years. Once the judge felt he had a free hand in the matter. But we were looking through the evidence. Oh, of course, you knew that. That's why you came in to give Ms. Probert a helping hand. I was after another name, as it so happens, but I kept finding yours. Charles Hearthstoke, in for a weekly massage at the Battersea Health Depot and Hanky-Panky Centre. Was entirely innocent, he protested. Oh, good. You'll be able to explain that to our learned head of chambers, when you can find him. But Hearthrug looked as though he was no longer eager to find Soapy Sam Ballard, or level his dreadful accusations against Henry and Diane. From time to time, and rather too often for my taste, we have chambers parties. And shortly after the events described previously, Claude Erskine-Brown announced that he was to finance one such shindig. He had some particular but unknown cause for celebration. So we were all assembled in Ballard's room, where Pomeroy's most reasonably priced méthode champenoise was dished out by Henry and Diane to the members of chambers with their good ladies, and a few important solicitors and such other distinguished guests as Mr. Justice Featherstone, now fully restored to health both of mind and elbow.
Here you potted Rumpole's old brothel-keeper,
Uncle Tom greeted Sir Guthrie, making a gesture as though playing snooker.
Straight into the pocket.
It was a worrying case, Guthrie admitted. It must have been for you, Judge. Extremely worrying. I saw his point.
There used to be a rumour about the temple.
Uncle Tom was wandering down memory lane.
That old Helford Davis's clerk was running a disorderly house over a sweet shop in High Holborn. Trouble was no one could ever find it.
At which point Hilda, in a new hat, came eagerly up to Guthrie and said, "Oh, Judge, how we're going to envy you all that sunshine." And she went on, in spite of my warning growl. "Of course we'd love to retire to a warmer climate, but Rumpole's got all these new responsibilities. He feels he won't be able to let the Lord Chancellor down."
The Lord Chancellor?
Guthrie didn't seem quite to follow her drift.
He's expecting great things, apparently, Rumpole. Well, she raised her glass. Happy retirement.
Mrs. Rumpole, I'm not retiring.
Oh, but Marigold distinctly told me that it was to be Ibiza.
Well, I had toyed with the idea of loafing about all day in an old pair of shorts and an old straw hat, soaking up the sun, drinking sangria, but no, I feel it's my duty to go on sitting. Ibiza is no longer necessary, I explained to Hilda, but she had to say,
your duty, yes, of course. Rumpole is going to be doing his duty, too.
At which point our head of chambers banged a glass on his desk for silence.
I think we're going to hear about Rumpole's future now,
Hilda said, and Ballard addressed the assembled company.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Judge. It's delightful to have you with us. Well, in the life of every Chambers, as in every family, changes take place. Some happy, others not so happy. To get over the sadness first. Young Charles Hearthstoke has not been with us long, only 3 months, in fact.
3 months too long, if you want my opinion, I murmured to Uncle Tom, and Ballard swept on with his ill-deserved tribute.
But I'm sure we all came to respect his energy and drive. Charles has told me that he found the criminal side of our work here somewhat distasteful, so he is joining a commercial set in the Middle Temple.
At this news, Henry applauded with enthusiasm.
I'm sure we're all sorry that Charles has to leave us before he can put some of his most interesting ideas for the reform of Chambers into practice.
At this point I looked at Miss Probert. I have no idea what transpired when she and Hearthrug had their Chinese meal together, but I saw Liz's eyes wet with what I took for tears. Could she have been sorry to see the blighter go? I handed her the silk handkerchief from my top pocket, but she shook her head violently and preferred to sniff.
And now I come to happier news, Ballard told us. From time to time the Lord Chancellor confers on tried and trusty members of the bar, like Rumpole,
this was from Hilda sotto voce,
the honour of choosing them to sit as Deputy Circuit Judge.
We know he does, Hilda again, somewhat louder.
So we may find ourselves appearing before one of our colleagues, and be able to discover his wisdom and impartiality on the bench.
You may have Ballard before you, Rumpole, Hilda called out in triumph to my deep embarrassment.
This little party, financed, I may say, Ballard smiled roguishly, by Claude Erskine Brown.
So kind of Claude to do this for Rumpole, was my wife's contribution.
Is to announce that he will be sitting from time to time at Snaresbrook and Inner London, where we wish him every happiness.
Ballard raised his glass to Erskine Brown, as did the rest of us, except for Hilda, who adopted a sort of stricken whisper to ask,
Claude Erskine Brown will be sitting? Rumpole, what's happened?
My sitting, I tried to explain to her, like Guthrie Featherstone's Ibiza, is no longer necessary. And then I moved over to congratulate the new Deputy Circus Judge. Well done, Claude, and I told him. I've only got one word of advice for you.
Oh, what's that, Rumpole? Let everyone off?
Oh, no. Much more important than that. Always pay in cash.